Welcome to Change It Up Radio here with Paula Shaw. Oh, I'm so happy to have you on this show today. I am calling this show, What Does Real Science Know About the Virus? Because we keep hearing this thing and that thing, and there's so much misinformation out there, and there's so much confusion. And I thought it was time that we just sit down with a real scientist and find out what is really the science behind what we know about this virus. So my guest today will be Bob Hertz, who is the director of psy-tek Laboratories here in Encinitas, and they are a research facility. And Bob is definitely in the know about what we need to know. So before we get to all of that, I just want to welcome you to Change It Up Radio. Those of you who follow us know that we are a show about change. We like to spotlight change makers who are making the world a better place. And we also want to bring you information to help you deal with change in a smoother, more productive way. And I think our show today really encompasses both of those goals, because Bob is in the know. He's got a lot of great information for us, and he is also the head of a lab that is riding point on some very, very interesting technology to help our health and wellness be evaluated and be maintained in the state-of-the-art ways that are available to us now. So, also would like to tell you before we begin that Change It Up Radio has a website. And if you would like to hear past shows, and oh my goodness, we've had some incredible people on this show. You really want to check this out. You can go to changeitupradio.com and click on the Listen In tab. And just scroll through some of our past shows, and you will see we have had some amazing people on this show with information you really want. So please check out Change It Up Radio. Most of you know me, but I am Paula Shaw. I am not only the host of this show, I'm a life transition coach. And I also am the author of Grief, When Will This Pain Ever End?, which has been a pretty appropriate title for a lot of us during this whole pandemic. And also Saying the Right Thing When You Don't Know What to Say, as well as Chakras, the Magnificent Seven. And all of those books are available on Amazon. If you would like more information about my work, my books, my speaking, or any of my shows, you can find all of that information on paulashaw.com. That's paulashaw.com. Okay, let's talk, as they say. You know, a couple of weeks back, I did a show that I called Reflections from My 70s. And even though I'd only been 70 for 3 weeks at that time, now I'm going on a month. So I have a little more seasoning in this older age, or I would like to say more mature age. And one of the things I mentioned in that Reflections show was that I've noticed that a lot of times people seem to get more honest or more real as they grow older, because they just really don't care as much about what other people think. And they realize that all that's really important is how you feel about yourself. And so today, I want to talk about some things that have been going on recently in our country and in our lives. We all know that we're in the middle of a pandemic. And I don't have to tell you that that pandemic has changed everything about every aspect of our lives. And I mean, many of my nieces and nephews and my neighbor are teachers. And so I'm very, very aware of the change that's been going on in the schools. I myself was a first, second, and third grade teacher. And I can tell you, I have no idea how I would have taught children that age online. These teachers today who are really having to invent on a daily basis how to do this have been hugely affected by the coronavirus. Businesses have been hugely affected by the coronavirus. Many people are working from home. Many businesses have had to shut down altogether. Many businesses are trying to figure out how to do what they do in a whole new way. On the upside, I would say creativity is at an all-time high. I'm amazed at what I have seen people come up with, the creativity that has existed as people are trying to survive the change that has been thrust upon them by this virus. Medical experiences, what about that? How many of you have had to deal with telemedicine? I have to do telecounseling in many cases. So I think that has been a whole new experience. I haven't seen my doctor in this year. And when I tried to make an appointment the other day, she can't see me until December 15th. And many of the people I know are only able to get their medical appointments online. So that is a whole new ball game. I know in the beginning, many of us didn't even want to deal with anything that we might have as an issue with our health because we didn't want to go anywhere near a hospital, a medical office, anything like that. So there's another area that's been hugely impacted by this virus. Shopping. I don't know about you, where you live, but here in my town, you can't go into any kind of a store without a mask on. And while supplies are certainly more abundant than they were early in the pandemic, there's still some things that are difficult to get. And a lot of us, I think, order whatever we can from Amazon to avoid extra trips to any kind of a market. What about personal grooming? For a long time, barbershops, salons, nail places, all of that was shut down. And I have to say, on the upside, some of the men look really great and masculine with that longer hair that ended up growing during that time. Many of us, though, we had our own little sufferings, you know, the roots were coming in, or the extensions needed fixing, or the highlights needed doing, and we were stuck. So that was a biggie that affected so many people. Travel. Travel has certainly not been the same, and who knows when it will be the same again. Voting. This voting situation, I think, is crazy. Crazy. That's not the best word I could use, but it's the word I'm going to use for now. I heard on the news the other day that the people in Texas are suing their governor because he's making it so difficult for them to get to a ballot box, some having to travel 20 miles. My own parents vote by mail, and I'm sure that's what they'll be wanting to do this year because they're in their 90s, and that's certainly a high-risk group. But people are having to stand in line already and maybe drive 20 miles in Texas. Now, hopefully in California, nothing like that will happen because I think we have a pretty amazing governor who really seems to care about the people. But this whole idea that suddenly mail voting isn't okay when we've been doing it for a zillion years is crazy. And all of the worry that we have about whether we'll be able to vote, how long will the lines be, should we fill out our mail-in ballot and then take it in on the day of the elections to go into the box, what do? There's all kinds of angst going on here. meetings are all happening online. It's pretty much, guys, like, can you think of an area of your life that has not been affected by the coronavirus? It's just about everything I can think of. And yet, this week, in this last week, our president tested positive, went to the hospital, which we would all assume means that things are very serious, but somehow in a few days was suddenly feeling better than he had felt in 20 years, and then made the following statement: "Don't be afraid of COVID. Don't let it dominate your life." I'm not a political show, but I can't let that go without speaking about it. How do you not let it dominate your life when it has changed our lives in so many ways? How are we not afraid of it when it's still out there? Cases are still spiking. These things need to be addressed. I believe this was an incredibly harmful statement that the president made this week. But I'm not a scientist. I'm not the one that can give you the facts about whether or not you should be afraid and whether or not you should let it dominate your life. But I have someone on this show today that I'm going to be talking to in just a moment who is a scientist and who can give us those facts. So I really want to urge you to stay with me, because right after this break, we are going to be talking to scientist Bob Hertz. We'll be right back. Facebook live stream viewers, you know that we don't actually leave, that this will all go into the studio to be put together into a radio show. So we are just going to get right into the next segment, because I don't know about you, but I am very anxious to talk to Bob. All right, here we go. Welcome back to Change It Up Radio, here with Paula Shaw. I am very excited in this segment to introduce you to scientist Bob Hertz, who is going to be able to answer our questions about what's real, what's not, what's misinformation, and how should we really be feeling about living in the midst of this pandemic. So let me tell you just a little bit about Bob Hertz, who is the managing director of psy-tek. He has over 50 years of entrepreneurial experience specializing in technology with expertise in software development, communications, pediatric cardiology, robotics, AI, and man-machine interfaces. He also has 25 years in complementary energy-based techniques and oh, I'm sorry, let me go back and say that correctly. He has 25 years in complementary energy-based medicine, subtle energy research, and those sorts of, shall we say, alternative approaches or state-of-the-art approaches to medicine and well-being. psy-tek Labs, which he co-founded with his life partner, Mary Clark, is a research laboratory and testing center that features pioneer devices that measure the biofield, the subtle energies that access various states of wellness and health. These devices include brain mapping, heart rate variability, interstitial fluid analysis, and medical thermal imaging, which, by the way, I had at psy-tek myself just last month. So without any further ado, let me introduce you to Bob Hertz. Hello, Bob.
Hello there, Paula. Good to be here.
I'm so glad to have you here, because as I was just saying to our listeners, there's a lot of misinformation going on out there. There's a lot of confusion, and there's a lot of hearsay about what's happening and what we should do. So Bob, let's begin with, let's talk some specifics about the virus. All right, we all know it's a novel virus. We've never seen anything quite like it before. We know that it began in China, in Wuhan, but tell us, what is the latest that we know about how it's transmitted?
Well, we've learned a lot, but we go back to the original statement, which is that it is airborne. It's not just airborne in particles when you sneeze or breathe or speak, but it produces an aerosol. An aerosol stays suspended in the air for hours. You can take a sneeze, walk away. Somebody can walk through it 4 hours later and pick up some of the material and become infected. So masks are important. They protect others when you don't necessarily know that you are infected. 45% is said to be caused by asymptomatic people who have no symptoms, are not aware that they're carrying the virus, and inadvertently are affecting people. And that is a large piece of the puzzle that we're facing now.
45%. That's huge. So like the regular flu, which some people have compared this to the flu, but the regular flu, you know you have it because you have symptoms, you feel awful, right? You're telling me that you can be asymptomatic, and when you're asymptomatic, do you feel at least kind of tired or kind of punk or not yourself, or can you really feel great?
You not necessarily feel anything other than your normal feelings for the day.
Wow.
It's asymptomatic means you have no symptoms, and some people have mild symptoms and they don't think they have anything either. But that's just the problem. And in order for us to really control what's going on and put in a slowdown end to it, we need to get everyone tested, because everyone is a potential unknowing carrier. It's just a fact, and it's a
So
big fact.
what is the average? I know this, one of the things about this virus, just yesterday I heard a doctor at my Rotary meeting saying that so many people are being affected in different ways because the virus seems to pick and choose which organs it's going to attack depending on who you are. So people are presenting with different symptoms, some with intestinal symptoms, some with the lung thing, the throat thing. But what kind of an incubation period are we talking about on the average? From the time, let's say I'm exposed, walking through a sneeze that happened 4 hours ago, what incubation, what am I looking at? How many days till I know something's wrong if I'm not asymptomatic?
A typical first exposure incubation is between 2 and 7 days. That's typical. It can be longer, it can be quicker, but between 2 and 7 days. That's about where it is.
Okay.
So if you take a test, you've been exposed, and you wait a couple of days and get an antibody test, you could tell whether or not you had a IgM antibody, which indicates the initial phases. But without a nasal swab or the other type of test to find antigen test, you don't know if you're infected or not. So both of those are pretty important.
Boy, I'll say. So, I mean, in a way, to be totally safe, you almost have to be tested every day, right? Or at least a couple of times a week?
It really depends on your exposure to the population. A first responder, some of the research people I work with in Phoenix and New York, they test first responders daily. And they test them for the active infection and for the antibodies, but the active infection is going to tell you whether you have it absolutely or not. And the antibody tells you how your body has responded to exposure.
So, and I know we're going to talk in a little bit more depth a little bit later in the show about the testing, because I would really like you then to explain exactly the difference between the two tests. Most of the daily testing that's being done on people like you just described is either the throat or the nasal swab, correct?
Correct.
And that
Yeah.
tells you very quickly now, fortunately we get the results quickly, but that tells you if you've been exposed or are you carrying the virus. What does it tell you?
It tells you whether or not you are infected. You
Ah,
can carry the virus and not be infected. As a matter of fact, people who are actually go through the virus and have gone through all of the stages and their bodies are showing that they have the acquired immunity and the nasal swab shows they have no active infection. The virus itself is capable of living in the back of your throat or your nose 45 days approximately, and you can shed live virus even after you're over the disease yourself. So it's not like the typical flu. It's very different, although some of the symptoms are very similar. And the biggest problem is that we haven't been around it long enough to see what the long-term effects or even the midterm effects of what happens a year from now, what happens 5 years from now, how does it affect children, and how does it affect other age groups. But we do know that it has this remarkable ability to affect many different organs and create many different, I'll call them red herrings. They COVID toes, COVID nose, COVID. There's a COVID name for almost every symptom that appears that isn't tracked back to a normal pathology.
wow. So in a way, Bob, you're saying we're at the very beginning of this thing. We're just beginning to really get a sense of the scope of how big it is and how much it can affect our lives and our bodies. Correct?
Well, yes, we're at the beginning of understanding what it does in the long term and even in the midterm. We're not in the beginning of it happening. It's been happening since
Right.
fall last year in this particular strain.
Mm-hmm.
So we've had enough exposure to know how to cope with it, how to restrict its spread. As you see, for most of the countries that have taken it seriously and made the type of demands of the public that are necessary to put your arms around it, and you see exactly what happens. Regardless of the rhetoric, it's just a 1, 2, 3, do this, do that, and you will start to curb the spread and get your arms around it. And then when it outbreaks again, another quick retreat back to the masks and whatever else you need to sequester people who are infected. It becomes a much easier task, as you can see from most of the major countries in Europe.
So what is that 1, 2, 3?
1, 2, 3 is to, number one, stay at home, stay out of the public space if you can. Number two, if you're in the public space, you don't know if you're infected. Even if you had it and you were cured, because the antibodies are now, we're finding that they don't last like we expected. If you have the virus and you are quote unquote cured from it, and your antibodies wear off in a typical 90 to 120 days, not like the polio vaccines or whatever exposure that gives you acquired immunity for years or a lifetime. Even when a vaccine is developed, at this point, we know that we'll need a booster. We could need a booster every quarter.
Wow.
One company is working on a single shot, and I wish them well, because that would be a wonderful thing to happen. But the common sense says, look, we know that the antibodies effectiveness and actually antibodies themselves disappear. On the short IgM antibody, it doesn't even last 30 to 50 days. But on the long term one, you'd expect it to last for quite a while longer than 120 days. And I'm sure some does. People who have had a very serious infection long term, they build up some very, very powerful antibodies. And we're using them to help people who are not as fortunate. But
Bob,
it's all.
you know, I really want to hear more about this. And I heard even that the president received antibody therapy. But we've got to take a quick break. But we come right back and let's talk about that and also finish up the 1, 2, 3 of what the country really needs to do to get on the other side of this virus. We'll be right back. All right, Bob, if you're ready, I'm ready. I'm so excited about what you're saying. I want to hear what's next. All right, here we go. Welcome back to Change It Up Radio with Paula Shaw and my guest today, Bob Hertz, Director of psy-tek Laboratories, a research facility here in Encinitas. And we are talking the science about the coronavirus. You want to stay tuned. And if you missed the beginning of this show, please go back and hear it because we are talking about some very important things that everyone needs to know. So Bob, you were just saying that the antibodies, once a person has had the virus, which very often, like with flu, like with polio, with other kinds of viral infections, once you've had it, you now have antibodies and you're good to go. You're not going to get it again. But did I hear you correctly in that you just said these antibodies are lasting maybe only 120 days?
That's true, but I want to go back on something you said about the flu.
Yeah.
Everybody knows the flu vaccines have to be re-engineered every year.
Good point.
So even this one would probably need to be re-engineered. But at this point, we have a bigger problem because the immunity does not last as long as we hoped it would. So when a vaccine comes up, most likely you'll need a booster or maybe more, as much as once a quarter. I hope not. But I think that as we have more time to work on this, there's a lot of brilliant minds across the world who are scrambling to make sure that not only that there's a vaccine, but that there's other remedies and drugs that are created to help mitigate the problems, make it less effective, and give us an easier way of working through the disease. And typically, an infection from this virus is relatively mild, and 80% of the population will go through some flu-like or even a little more serious. The problem is that people who are already compromised and older, and people of certain racial, people of color, certain genetic dispositions are more susceptible and more sensitive to the way this virus works.
Yes.
So, that's really what the problem is here.
One of the things that I was told a couple of weeks ago in my interview with Dr. Ken Redcross was that they're finding out that people who have high levels of vitamin D or have stronger immune systems and are doing better. If they get the virus, they're not dying. Have you heard anything about that?
Well, vitamin D is very important, and exposure to sunlight along with it. But I think that it's more important to look at what happens to the people who are severely compromised, to understand the problem they go through. The ones who are really compromised, the elderly and people who have respiratory problems, they suffer from the fact that their immune system is too good. What happens
Say more about that. I'm confused.
Yeah, in this particular virus and some of the progression that we've noticed is that the very good immunity starts to attack the alveoli, around the hairs around our air sacs, making them more compromised. And what happens when that happens, then it leads to possible bacterial infections and pneumonia. It's the secondary stuff that usually nails people who are compromised. So people who are, who've had the bends from being too deep in the water, or people who have, problems with altitude sickness, they suffer the same type of problems where the water builds up, edema, around the and you actually can drown because you cannot get the oxygen through the liquid into the alveoli, which pushes the oxygen into the bloodstream. And, so at that level, it's the same thing that happens with congestive heart failure. the lining around the heart fills up with liquid and the heart expands. And they're very, very similar. So steroid use has been very effective, and anaerobic steroids, and they're still playing with it. We have not been in this long enough to have the the luxury of being able to really study it from a non-infective stage. We are traumatized by the number of hospital beds that become occupied. And when an older person starts to become compromised, they need to look at their oxygen level. Spend 20 or 50 bucks and get yourself, if you're 60 or older, get yourself the device. You put your finger in it and it tells you what your oxygen level is and your pulse.
Ah.
And if you're under 92 and you have the virus, go to the hospital, period, because it moves very, very quickly after that point.
Now, is that 92 years of age, or the 92 is your oxygen level?
92%
Okay.
oxygen. You should be able to see, most people can see between 95 and 99 on a regular basis.
Mm-hmm.
And if your first reading is low, take it again. Don't panic. At least you're looking at the first sign that should indicate you need to move.
All right, Bob, I want to circle back for a minute because we didn't quite finish the 1, 2, 3, what you were talking about, of the countries that have gotten on top of this, of which, as if I'm correct, I think we're at the bottom of the list. What are the 3 things that they've done that have really helped turn this around for those countries?
Well, the first thing is, don't politicize a disease. And that's just foolish.
Amen.
Listen to the scientists like me, because we're not looking at why, we're looking at why and how and what we can do about it. We don't really care about what side of the fence you're on, most of us. And so that's number 1. Number 2, make common sense. Even back in the pandemic in 1917, they knew enough to put masks on. And they actually had, laws to make sure it happened. No spitting, the type of typical things that says we're not going to spread our bodily fluids around for other people to catch what we have. It's very simple that way. But even more important, since we have a situation where so many people are asymptomatic, it is huge. And this is what people have to understand. If just because you look fine and you feel fine doesn't mean you're not killing people. It's that simple.
Wow.
And even if you do have it and you think you're feeling good, you don't know what you're spreading and you don't know how far it'll go. So the safe thing, number 2, is to shelter at home if you can. Shut down public businesses so that there is less of exposure. Do it for 4 to 8 weeks on a complete basis. And most scientists and CDC would agree that you'll have your arms around it, but it's a total coast to coast, border to border. Take the entire thing and say, let's get rid of this thing, get our arms around it,
Yes.
and make everybody who has had it or not wear a mask, because they don't know. If we had a magical thing called a test, they could find out. But we have been shorted on the tests, regardless of what has been told to you in the news. I work with first responders in Phoenix and in New York who are dealing, I deal with researchers who deal with first responders in both Phoenix and New York. And they need to be tested every day to really back out. They don't want to help somebody who has it and then the next day give it to someone else. So testing is so critical. And statements like do less testing are more or less saying do more killing. It's really simple, because we do have the numbers now to show that the percentages of people who are exposed and how quickly they are compromised and end up dying. So
let's talk a little bit about this mask thing, because there are people who are saying it violates their civil liberties. Some people are marching. It's become politicized, which I think is a damn shame. But tell us the science behind masks. Do they really do anything?
It's very simple. You're stopping the people who have the infection, the ones who know it and the ones who don't know it, from breathing into the air. And remember, this virus is suspended as an aerosol if you sneeze or cough. So if you're sure you will never sneeze or cough and you won't even breathe out hard, don't wear a mask. But that's kind of foolish because there's no way to really see what's going on from an oversight perspective unless everybody does it. It's not about wearing a mask for yourself. It's not about what side of the political fence you're on. It's because you don't want to spread it if you don't know you have it. And if you do have it, you definitely don't want to spread it. Just take a look at what happens when somebody who is asymptomatic comes back into the household and gives it to everyone. And it's happening every single day.
Well, and it seems that it's happening in the White House. That obviously must be what the situation is. Even though the president feels better, according to what you've taught us, 40 days, he's still able to infect people if he's not wearing a mask, correct?
He's not even there yet. First of all, what he has is less than 2 weeks old. So the bottom line is he's still shedding it whether he admits it or not. That's the fact. So if he tests where he does not have the virus anymore, he's clear of the infection,
right.
Then, as I said earlier, the live virus can still be resident in his nasal cavity or the back of his throat. I'm not saying that's the case or even a lot of the case, but we do know it is some of the case. Even if it's rare, it means that you don't know this is over and you still can infect people even a month after you are free of symptoms.
But if during that time you wear a mask, then are you less likely to infect other people?
It's more than less likely. You're not going to infect people.
Okay.
Spewing the virus into the air, or actually, we have to be careful about touching things as well. So washing your hands is important, and making sure that when you get something from someone else, whether it's a package or not, understand that there are different lifespans for the virus on different medium. So
Bob, we're going to have to take a quick break. I'm so sorry, but we'll be right back and we'll pick up right here.
Very good.
All right. Welcome back to Change It Up Radio, here with Paula Shaw and my guest today, who's got me on the edge of my seat with such incredible information that he's giving us about the coronavirus. Scientist Bob Hertz, who is the director of psy-tek Laboratories, a research facility here in Encinitas. So, Bob, we were just talking about how we can avoid spreading the virus because we can have virus alive in us. Even after we test negative, the virus can still live for 40 days in our nasal cavities, correct?
And I would say up to, and I would also say it is rare. It's not an everyday thing, but it happens enough to know that you could still be doing it. So to save lives, what's an extra 40 days of wearing a mask so you're not infecting the people you care about and people in public?
Absolutely.
Some people are jogging around wearing masks, okay? And there's a lot of misperceptions about oxygen, okay, carbon dioxide. And there are some studies that just came out, although there are lots of other ones that show that the oxygen is reduced. It's not quite as bad as has been shown by some other videos that have popped up online.
Good to know. Now, this is our last segment, and I don't want us to miss out on the opportunity to talk about the testing, because you have really enlightened us about how important testing is, because as I recall, you said 40% of people walking around out there are asymptomatic and don't know they have it, but can spread it. So tell us a little bit about the testing that psy-tek offers.
Okay, first of all, I just wanted to say I'm a computer scientist. I work with medical science
Ah,
and work on techniques to help them get back to work now, as well as work on different methods of getting people tested. So the typical test is the nasal swab. The problem with the nasal swab is that the way the FDA requires it being done now, it needs to be administered by a health professional. So even if you get one of the kits at home, you have to have a health professional administer it. And then the worst part of it is that you have to ship it to a lab. Now, most of the testing facilities, most of the equipment, Abbott and the other ones, are wonderful. They pick it up fast. They're very accurate. But by the time that vial gets to the lab, having been compromised by an anticoagulant and a carrier fluid, there's been a lot of proof that the testing is compromised. Not all bad, but it is compromised by that travel. And they've gotten a lot better. Why? Because they are getting them quickly, they're testing them fast, and they're turning them around much quicker. So I would say if you want to know if you're infected, you need a nasal swab or a blood draw, not an antibody test. But an antibody test is very important because it can tell you how your body has responded to having the COVID-19 in you. So we at the lab here were frustrated that people cannot test themselves at home. They can't do that, and there's a lot of good reasons for it. Protecting people from themselves, not doing the test properly. So we opened up a research project here a couple of months ago, and we have a institutional review board sanctioning it and approving it. And what we're doing is we're creating these kits so that we are taking the typical box of these antibody kits that come 20 to a box, and we're breaking them up and producing kits that look like this. So this kit here has everything in it for a person to prick themselves and take the blood out and put it in a cassette, and then put the reagent buffer on top of it, wait 10 minutes, and see if you have either one of the two antibodies. IgM indicates recent exposure, but if you're negative and you were recently exposed, you're not out of the woods, because it could take more days for you to show that antibody kicking over. So the incubation period is a little different for everyone. So I would say if you know you're exposed and you get an antibody test and it's negative, and you've only been there 2 or 3 days, come back in another 2 or 3 days, stay sheltered in, and make sure you really don't have it. Even if you're asymptomatic, it will show up because your body will react and produce the antibodies. So,
or could you do a combination of both tests to find out more quickly if you're infected?
if I was getting tested, or anyone in my family is getting tested, I would make sure they get both. They need to know if they're infected right then and there.
Right.
And then they need to know how long they've been infected. Just the antibody test is very important. And so they're more readily available and less expensive to do the rapid antibody testing. A lot of bad press on them early on, but I can tell you that my exposure to this entire process was caused because one of my researchers reacted to an antibody test I sent to them. And they said, thank God we can finally do our work. And that was about a month into a distribution of several kits from Korea and Germany and China. And, you know, most of them are great, but less expensive ones, of course, and the ones that are rapidly produced can be compromised. So, you know, the best thing to do is to go into a LabCorp or Quest or CVS is doing them in drive-throughs and get the real deal from there. But if you want to test yourself at home, there's no way to do that unless you want to also have a doctor or nurse come to the home and then ship it off again to a lab. If you want to know right now, these tests are not anymore, in my opinion, and we've been working on this for a long time, less problematic for people to do than a glucose test. You take one of these little, in the kit, take one of these little lances. This one's an automatic lance. Pop off the top, stick it on your finger, and you get a drop of blood. And then you take that blood. I'll open up a cassette here. And you put the blood into the little bottom hole here. Then you put the reagent on top of it. And in a few minutes, you will see it rise. And you'll first see whether or not the actual test is functioning properly with the control line lighting up. But then in a few minutes, if you see either one of the other lines light up, it indicates you have those antibodies present. That's all it can tell you. Antibodies are present. On the other tests, which we haven't really had availability to use a rapid test, most of them go to the lab. So recently, we know several manufacturers have come up with a rapid swab test where you can actually find out the same results by taking the swab and putting it in your nose and then putting it into a very similar situation. Here we have one. This is a kit that we're waiting for approval from our institutional review board now before we add it to our research. And the research is available to the public. The public has to sign informed consents, so we protect their rights as subjects, as in any other clinical trials. But in this kit, we have a nasal swab, and we have a little tube. And the tube that we use, I don't know if you can see this, there's a tube in there. That tube has some liquid in it, and you would take the nasal swab and stick it in the tube, squish it around a little bit, wait for about 5 minutes for it to get to room temperature, and then you take that swab that's been in the solution, and you take the solution that was produced from you swishing the swab around, and you put it into another type of cassette. This cassette is designed to say whether or not you are infected or not. It's just yes or no. So this also is a 10 to 15 minute exposure time. So this would be a wonderful thing for businesses and companies to give to their employees, or say a senior resident before he checks in. Are you infected? Let's check it in the parking lot before you infect everybody here.
Beautiful.
So we've been working with tests to try to make them usable.
Can you pause for one moment, because this is one of those real life things. My computer is at a very low energy level and I need to plug it in. So let's just pause right there and we'll pick right up in 1 second when I get this plugged in.
Got it.
Okay, we just breathed life back into the computer. I was going to see if we could make it to the end. I didn't want to disturb you, but I didn't also want us to lose you in the middle of this wonderful show. So these two tests, if people would like to get a hold of them, they need to become part of this study, right? Yes. And that is as simple as signing a release form. Is that what you said?
Well, if you go to the website, psy-tek, psy-tek.com, and you click on COVID, get tested, then you will go through the process that we are required, because this is strictly research. We do not advertise, come get tested. We advertise, come join our research. The purpose of the research is very straightforward. We believe that it should be available at homes for people to just do it at home by themselves and find out. So we have opened up this research for the ease of use and reliability of rapid home tests. And the data that we've been collecting will be used to help a kit manufacturer do what we did, to prepare them for single use and provide enough documentation and safety precautions so that the FDA will deem them safe enough for people to use by themselves at home. So if you've done a pregnancy test, that's simple. If you have diabetes or type 2 diabetes, you're testing your blood all the time. that test is very similar. And there's no reason in our belief that that should be kept from the public. And right now it is. It is a medical device. It needs a prescription. It needs a health professional to administer it.
I see. Well, I love what you're doing because from what you've taught us today, only being able to test at least, I would say, once a week at home will make us all safe ultimately. You know, we'll end this virus in our country because enough of the other steps that you described are really not being taken that thoroughly. So once again, for people to do this, they need to sign a release. And then what is the cost of actually getting a test that they can use at home and become part of this study?
Well, it's been going down and down and down because there are many more players and it's becoming more available and less expensive. So we started at 125 and now we're down to 45. The reason we charge is because we have to actually re-engineer the kit.
Sure.
We don't just sell it, and there's costs involved. And we do have cases where philanthropists have helped us do testing at facility, and we're open to that as well. So we are a nonprofit, and we are set up to do this kind of work. And our mission here right now is to help like companies who are doing medical exams get back to work safely. And that's kind of why we did your medical thermal imaging exam that you did. And when you came here, we tested you to make sure you were not infected.
Yep.
And then you got the use of our incredible new robotic camera.
Yes, I did. No one was anywhere near me. It was
And
great.
that allows that particular test to be safer than it was 6 months ago.
Yes.
And now we're working on the other ones. We're about to announce that we have the brain mapping available. Okay, and we also have another test we use, one of our Pioneer Frontier devices that measures the biofield. And then we also have other testing here that we get a complete picture of the energy level as well as the pathology going on in the systems.
And Bob, what I would love you to do before we run out of time, which we just about have, is mention the date of your online open house and give them the website address one more time.
Okay, so the website address, and I'll repeat it again, is www.psy-tek.com. We have an open house on October 21st. If you go to the website, you can click on it and sign up. It's going to be a big webinar. We're going to show you every one of the tests we do with a patient, and then we will have a Q&A, a live Q&A after that to talk about or answer questions that people may have after they saw the process. And a lot of women have already gone through the medical thermal imaging, but it would be nice for people who haven't to see how non-invasive it is, and the other tests, how simple they are.
Bob, I am so delighted to have had you on this show today. I think you've enlightened us about some really important things, and I thank you for being with us. All of the information as far as how to reach psy-tek or online, if you didn't get a chance to write it down, it will be in our show notes. This show will be aired in San Diego on AM 1170 and 96.1 FM Sunday evening at 9 o'clock. And by next week, we'll be on every major podcast platform, including iHeartRadio. I urge every one of you, if you enjoyed and if you learned from what you heard today, please share this show. We need to get our country back online, and you heard the things that Bob shared with us we need to do. So thank you, Bob. Thank you to all of you. Stay safe, and we'll see you next week on Change It Up Radio. Bye-bye.